Welcome to Westeros.org's YouTube channel. This is a review for episode 6, Beyond the Wall. And this episode is a very talky episode. Until the very end, there is not that much that happens, other than characters having various confrontations, hashing out various things, and talking about some pretty pointless things. It all sets up for the ending, which is pretty major, has a rather major development, and you may consider this a spoiler in a sense for the books. Although I don't think it's going to be... I think it has some significance for the books, but I don't think it's quite as straightforward. And I will be discussing that more in detail towards the very end of the episode. And I'll say right now that this will also include spoilers for one of the unreleased chapters from The Winds of Winter, because I think that has some significance on what will actually happen. In this episode, we don't visit that many locations. Most of the action takes place beyond the wall. There's a little bit in Winterfell, a very brief section or two in Dragonstone, but the splitting up will be, again, a little different because characters move around a lot, and boy do they move around fast in this episode as well. We'll start off with Winterfell, which has an entirely separate storyline from the other two locations for this week, and it is basically a continuation of the weird confrontational attitude between Sansa and Arya, mostly perpetuated by Arya, really. It starts off pretty well. You have this pretty nice scene with Arya talking about when she was, practicing with Bran's bow when it had been left behind, and finally, she realized that Ned had been watching her all the time and was applauding her when she finally managed to hit the target. But then she turns around and, basically, and you betrayed him, she tells Sansa. She's gotten the letter, the note that Littlefinger had dug up from Luwin's archives, basically the note from the letter that Sansa wrote, when she was coerced by the Lannisters to do so, telling the rest to come down to King's Landing and, bend the knee and the whole thing. And so Arya is pissy about this, basically feels that Sansa should have been able to do more. She doesn't buy into the idea of Sansa, oh, you were forced, well, I would have done better, and la-di-da. And it's not a good scene, especially because Maisie just isn't up to the task of this Arya. She was good with a younger Arya, but as the character has sort of gotten older and is expected to do some other things, it's not working any longer. I don't know if it's that the writing is terrible, the fact that her development is very weird and kind of wishy-washy back and forth in a strange way, but something is wrong, and Maisie trying to be menacing to Sophie's as Sophie's Sansa is just not, it doesn't come across well at all. We have another confrontation between them towards the end as well, which is where Sansa has gone into Arya's room and found her bag of faces, and now Arya is being extra creepy and sort of threatening to take Sansa's face so that she can pretend to be the Lady of Winterfell. Between that, we have Sansa seeking out Littlefinger about this whole thing, and basically I think that is the one thing that hints that Sansa at least knows that something is up. I had people, after I complained about their last confrontation, I had people saying that, oh, well, this is all a setup. Sansa and Arya know that Littlefinger set up Arya to find the letter, and this is all them setting him up. But there is absolutely no evidence of the fact that their antagonism is a setup. Littlefinger is nowhere to be seen in any of these confrontations between them. Unless we're to believe that he's lurking under the floorboards in Arya's room or something like that, he's just not there. And it's not like they are acting sort of towards him as well, or pretending to show this antagonism just for his sake. It's quite clear that it's there. Arya is being threatening towards Sansa for real. Now Sansa, on the other hand, probably suspects something from Littlefinger, because after he brings up the fact that Brienne would have to intervene to protect at least one of them if it comes to a confrontation between them, she decides to send Brienne off. She takes the opportunity when the letter comes from King's Landing to send off Brienne to King's Landing in her stead. I think she wants to remove the potential that Littlefinger could manipulate Brienne to step in. Maybe he figures that's a way to get Brienne killed if he sets up Brienne against Arya or something like that. So yes, Sansa is suspicious of Littlefinger, and she has said as much as well. She thinks that the idea that Cersei wants them fighting. I think she realizes that it is in the interest of their enemies to have Sansa and Arya fight, and I think that I guess she's supposed to count Littlefinger as a potential enemy. So, but the idea that they are working together and somehow setting this up to entrap Littlefinger, it simply isn't true. There's just some really bad writing and really bad motivations for having Arya be this incredibly unpleasant to her sister. Yes, they're not supposed to have gotten along when they were children, but now it's bizarre how unforgiving and how one track she is about this whole thing, about the betrayal and saying that Sansa was responsible for killing Ned. I mean, the letter only proves that she was asking the rest of the family to surrender, basically. So it's, yeah, they clearly want tension. They clearly want to build up to something. I don't quite know what they're building up to, but this is not them faking it. The only thing that is fake is the writing and, unfortunately, some of the acting, which really doesn't work very well at all. We have two scenes on Dragonstone, although the second one falls squarely as an interlude within the Beyond the Wall plot, and I'll get back to the problems of that scene later. The longer scene on Dragonstone is a talk between Dany and Tyrion. It starts off okay in the sense that it's not Dany being regal and foreboding and doing it in an awkward way. Instead, it's Tyrion, talking about Dany as a ruler and things like that, and trying to get her more on board with his way of doing things. Although in the process, they manage a cutesy and a bit fan-servicey joke about Jon Snow's height, which, yes, we get it. Kit Harington isn't a very tall, leading man or whatever. And it's, I don't know, it feels like it can be funny, but it just feels like more of these, they're piling them on, pulling in too much of the actors, too much of things that, I don't know that this is something that Dany would be remarking on, maybe if she was 16-year-old Dany, but it's not really the way that they have played her for quite a while. Then again, they have to talk about the bloody wheel. It seems that they really want to get back to it in every episode. Tyrion has become quite a fan of the wheel, I have to say. He really wants to break it. But since they also go on in the same scene to talk about how Tyrion is concerned about Dany not being able to have children and not having named a successor, thinks that they should be doing that before they go off trying to win the war, because obviously it could be dangerous for her. And yes, it could be, especially since she's still not wearing any armor. But having a successor and taking the throne and having a successor, this sounds awful lot like continuing with the same old monarchy that they still have. So they're really fuzzy on the whole bit about what exactly the breaking of the wheel involves. I'm not strictly sure that Tyrion knows it either, but he's really fond of saying that phrase. And that's really what comes out of it, other than, Dany knows she doesn't want to take his advice on that. She wants to win the throne, and then she'll think about successors. And in the other scene where she has gotten a message that means she has to hurry off northwards, then she no longer wants to listen to Tyrion because he tells her to do nothing, and no, she did that once, and she's not going to do that again. So Tyrion is left sighing and not being... Everything is setting up here, I think, that the idea that Tyrion can't really... he's her hand, but he's not really having as much influence as he would like, and obviously that is probably going to spell some kind of disaster at some point. But I'm going to leave the rest of my sighs and rants and general ill feeling about this episode for the final massive section dealing with Beyond the Wall. Initially, the section Beyond the Wall consists of a lot of walking and a lot of talking. The setup for the final confrontations of the episode is, to my mind, really bizarrely structured. They have all these characters doing, they basically pair up in different combinations to have little talks that mostly sort of go back on prior events, sort of reminding you when they last interacted, or tying up some loose ends, like Jon and Jorah. Jon finally gets a chance to offer Longclaw back to Jorah, which Jorah of course refuses. Gendry gets to whine about the Brotherhood having sold him to Melisandre, and then the Hound doesn't think that sounds so bad at all, her, getting him naked and putting leeches on him or whatever. And generally the Hound is being just, I don't know, I'm not really, never one of my favorite characters, and now he just feels completely like pointlessly hanging on with these people here. There's Tormund, I guess, is probably the one that works best in the way they're playing him as sort of funny, slightly mad, and I think, Christopher Hivju, actually, it comes off nicely here. He sounds rather Tormundish, I think. And the conversations that he has with people, all right. But mostly these seem like, they had to pass time in this episode, and they just decided to pair off people to left and right and have them have somewhat, either sort of wrap up or set up discussions. And then it turns out that, of course, why they had to lug the Hound around, I hadn't quite understood this initially, that the vision that he saw in the flames, I thought that was kind of something that the Brotherhood as a whole, or at least Thoros and Beric, had seen before as well, and they were showing him to show that it was important for him to go north with them. But no, it turns out that that particular vision of where the Whites were coming around sort of Eastwatch and sort of towards the ocean there, that was something that just he had seen, so that he had to lead them to where it was supposed to be. So I guess that was just a reason for having something to do with the Hound, basically, because he's obviously completely misplaced as far as storylines go. And then they get to this point and they start seeing some Whites and a White Walker, and they're now going to carry out this not so very clever plot. I didn't talk much about that one last week. A lot of people were asking in the comments of the video that why I didn't touch upon the stupidity of this whole let's go and catch a White. And I really don't know what else to say about it than just sort of sigh and shake my head. It's a bizarre idea, and then sending them out with just a few extra guys. They can't have any horses because they're filming on Iceland, but it all just, it's not the way you would do it. It's not a particularly smart expedition in any way, and now they try to get the jump on these Whites here, and there it turns out that killing a White Walker will kill all the Whites that he has turned. I don't know when they turned into vampires of some kind, or sort of personally involved in waking up specific Whites, because they just seem to wake up if they've died. And so beyond the wall and the cold sort of has touched them, they'll wake up. I don't think it has anything to do with a specific White Walker / other. But no, they've decided that that's how it works. And conveniently, one white must have tagged along with the wrong group, I guess, because it survives and they are able to grab it and pack it up. And of course, that's not the end of their troubles. Those whites and those White Walkers were, of course, not the only ones in the area, and quite soon they are being chased by masses and masses of whites. Jon decides that this is way too much for them to handle on their own, so he tells Gendry to run back to Eastwatch and send a raven. Okay, what good is that gonna do? But anyway, Gendry leaves his huge hammer behind and starts running. The rest are chased to a little island in the middle of a lake and surrounded by masses and masses of whites. Thoros expires on the island, having been clawed up by White Bear earlier, and they are basically waiting there for the end. But of course, someone is going to show up and rescue them, namely Dany and her dragons. But how did this work out? Well, we all know that the timeline has been completely crazy earlier. I've complained a lot about it. A lot of people have said, oh, you know, being too picky, you can't expect complete realism. Well, it would be nice with just a little drop of it sometimes. Basically, what we see here is that it's kind of late afternoon or something, maybe, when Jon tells Gendry to start running for Eastwatch, which he reaches when it's dark, so it's night. Around that time, they are stuck on this little island surrounded by whites. And then the next time we see them on the island, it's looking like morning. So they've passed the night and Thoros has died during the night. And I guess a few hours earlier, Gendry got to Eastwatch and sent the raven to Dragonstone. They then end up waiting for some more hours out on the little island until the hound stupidly tells the whites that it's okay to walk out on the ice. Don't worry too much about how this one white is supposed to have sort of independently realized that the ice was okay to walk on. I mean, it's not like they're supposed to be the most brainy guys around. But anyway, they realize it. They start coming for them and surrounding them and beating on them and generally being unpleasant until, you know, poor Jon has to shout for them to fall back, which might be a touch awkward when you're surrounded, but I guess eventually they manage to scramble onto some little hillock there in the middle of the island, where it's looking like it's going to be their last moment. Except that is when Dany and the dragons show up. And around now it's looking like it's maybe at best the evening of the next day. So it's taken less than 24 hours, because it's not as dark as when Gendry got to Eastwatch the day before, for a raven to go to Dragonstone and for Dany to fly from Dragonstone and up to Eastwatch and finding them out there in the middle of nowhere. Okay, that works, right? We have apparently ravens that have jet engines strapped to their asses, and these dragons are incredibly fast. I think they would probably give a 747 run for its money. I don't ask me again how Dany stays on at that speed, but glue, I guess, or something. Anyway, she gets there, starts toasting whites, everything is working fine. Then she lands and is planning to pick up more people on her, you know, Drogon air. Still no saddle or anything, so they're just going to be clinging on there. When the Night's King decides to go and throw a great big spear of ice through the air and kill Viserion. Never mind that he should probably have aimed for Drogon, who was much closer by, and then I'm sure he saw that Drogon was controlled by a rider and the other two weren't, and then he could perhaps have figured out that if he kills Drogon first, it's going to be much more convenient. But no, he kills Viserion first, so that then he can start sort of slowly getting another spear out and aiming for Drogon, which prompts Jon to, tell Dany to go off, and he'll stay behind, heroically sacrificing himself, except they had a loose end, namely Benjen, who had to show up and heroically sacrifice himself for Jon and toss him up onto his horse and have Jon ride away. The plot holes in the way this is structured, in just everything around this episode, are so large that you could definitely drive several dragons abreast through it, or fly rather. And then at the very end, when the Night King decides to wake up Viserion, he has whites dragging him out of the lake with massive chains. Gee, I wonder where they got those. Everything is just pulled out of someone's ass all the time, and yes, the effects look spectacular. Again, I mean, the dragons, when they take off from Dragonstone, amazing. When they show up and start burning the whites, fantastic as well. And when Viserion is hit by the ice spear and tumbles to its death, that's a really momentous thing. But just leave it at that. Just put together some effects and put these spectacular scenes out there. Don't even try to have any plot in between, because my God, you're not succeeding at all. It's like they decided, I mean, I can understand now why they wanted so few episodes for these last 2 seasons. It seems that basically, okay, we have these big plot points that we want to reach, and how do we get to them? Well, we'll just wave our hands and something will happen, and we'll kind of string people along and then throw masses of money at the effects, and they'll just go yay about the effects and forget that nothing, absolutely nothing leading up to them made sense. So yeah, this was a pretty rough episode to get through. There wasn't much to enjoy, unfortunately. There were plenty of eye rolls to be had. I think I counted about 7, some of them of the lengthier variety, like much of the beyond the wall scenes when I'm trying to puzzle through just how they're expecting this to work, and only coming up with, no, they don't really care. They're just hand waving it, and it's just, they're allowing it to be completely stupid. But there's so many other little things, like, continuous, the Arya Sansa confrontations, again bringing up the darn wheel, and the various conversations beyond the wall that just seemed, a lot of them seemed inserted to just pass time, and a little bits of weirdness that I didn't bring this one up, or I could have brought this one up earlier, but it sort of, I was reminded of it in this episode towards the end when Dany is looking at half-naked Jon and seeing his scars. Why exactly is it that he didn't want her to know that he's been resurrected? It seems like a very small thing, compared to everything else around them. Is he afraid that she's gonna think he's a white, or is it just another of those where they want some little tension, something hidden that can cause a conflict, or what is it? It's becoming very difficult to predict anything, because there are no lines to the way characters act. There's no consistency, and it was very difficult to find the best of this episode, so I'll just have to settle for the effects again. The dragons looked amazing. The resurrected or whitified polar bear was genuinely scary, but everything else would kind of have to fall under worst. And to finish off, I was going to deal with the momentous part of this episode, namely the death and resurrection of Viserion, and what I think that means for the future of Viserion in the books. And to do so, I will, as I said earlier, be discussing a chapter from The Winds of Winter, namely the Forsaken chapter, with Aeron Greyjoy, which heavily features Euron and some of the creepier things that are revealed around Euron. I think that this idea of a dragon being killed by the White Walkers, by the others, I think it's very unlikely, at least in this manner that it is done here. I find it difficult to see how something that is called, fire made flesh can be killed and resurrected by ice. There's magic in both, yes, and I'm not sure that maybe there would be some sort of crash here between the two types of magic, and maybe you could kill the dragon. I don't know that you could resurrect it. Obviously, there is no Night King either, so there isn't really any one person that could do something like this. Maybe, a bunch of them could swarm a dragon and kill it, sort of brute force, but this particular scenario I see as very unlikely. However, I do think, and that's been sort of on the writing for that has been on the wall for a long while, ever since the Dragonbinder horn showed up. I think it's very likely that somebody's going to take control over one of Dany's dragons, and the candidate for that is Viserion. I think that this is borne out not only by the fact that I think he has the least connection to anyone. Drogon obviously connects to Dany. I wouldn't be surprised if Rhaegal, named for Rhaegar, will eventually connect with Jon. Viserion has no immediate connection like that. And there's also in the Forsaken chapter, we see that it is entirely possible that Euron, we have a video on that as well, that Euron may have some connections to the others. It is plausible that he, like Bran, was a dreamer, and he was one of the ones caught by the others and maybe turned to their cause. Aeron sees him sitting on his throne with this pale woman with him, and I'm kind of wondering if, there's been also all sorts of speculation. Is it Dany? Is it Cersei? I want to see that maybe there's a direct connection to him being controlled by the others, and if then Euron takes control over Viserion with the horn, that will be indirectly a dragon on the other's side. If Euron is indeed fighting for the others in some way, the dragon will be doing so as well. So I think it's a shorthand because they're not introducing these more magical elements of Euron. As far as I can tell, there's been no hint of that. And I think we definitely would have had to see that by now. I don't think that on the show he has any connection to the others, but yes, the Forsaken chapter leaves that very possible and very open. So in that sense, they may be paralleling the idea of the dragon being controlled on the wrong side, so to speak, fighting for ice instead of fire, or however you want to put it. And then if we go further than that, and this is pure speculation because we don't have anything either in the books or on the show to suggest this, other than there's been a lot of speculation about Bran, and I said I'm buying more and more into the idea of Bran being the third head of the dragon. Maybe he would be the one who'd be able to take control over Viserion, take control away from the Dragonbinder horn by skin changing into the dragon. Could they be planning the same in this scenario with Viserion controlled by the Night King? Not impossible. We haven't seen any evidence of skin changing into a undead creature or person, but maybe that's going to be sort of a final test for Bran, and maybe that will be a way to resolve this weapon now being in the hands of the enemy. But that is, of course, going well beyond the evidence that we have now. But if they're going to parallel something in the books, I think that's what we're saying. The dragon ends up in control of the enemy. Eventually, Bran wrests control back. Whether that is just to have the dragon suicide or anything, I don't know that it's necessarily, going to leave the dragon alive in the end. But I think that will probably be the final resolution to the dilemma. We, as usual, at this point, we don't have the episode title for the next episode, which of course is the final episode of this season. So you'll just have to wait during the week and see what that might be revealing, unless of course there's more leaks, which we really don't hope, because that would be very bad for everyone involved, I think, if the final episode managed to leak as well. So hopefully you'll not be watching that until in a week, and then you will see another video, the final one from me for this season, after that.